But if I am going to use your position on you, one thing is clearly a benefit here, and it would be banning this material. I want to give these people less tools, not leave it open to more. Hey everyone, Pillow here. Before we get into this, I would just like to go ahead and post this warning. This debate will deal heavily with topics such as CSA and CSEM. It's not going to be something that we can really skip, so if that is something that you cannot handle in content, I suggest that you skip this one. As well as this, the intro of the other person I was debating did run a little long, so while I do heavily suggest that you watch it so that you get a better context, if at any point you do feel like you got a pretty good understanding of it, I do have a timestamp in the description so that you can skip ahead. As well as this, if you would like to debate or challenge me on any topic, my link to my Discord is in the description. You can just join and DM me from there, or you can DM me on Twitter, link in the description below. With that being said, let's get into the debate. Hey, howdy, hello everyone. Before we get into this, make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you like this. And hit that bell icon. Also follow me on Twitter and join my Discord. Links in the description so that you know whenever I go live. I go live on Fridays and Saturdays, or Fridays or Saturdays, depending on how I'm feeling that week. And I upload segments on Wednesday, and Friday. Let's get into this debate. How are you?
Hello.
Okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, especially given that I'm going on stream discussing a very controversial topic that I'm sure plenty of your audience is not pleased with.
Well, that's the thing about it. I advised you before, of course, I can't speak.
I took your advice. I did not read this. I did not read them. I'm just guessing that they probably aren't very.
Yeah, don't read chat and you'll be chill, but firstly, introduce yourself, the online screen name you use, pronouns, etc., etc. Please.
Okay, I am AnnieGal. My pronouns are she, her, and I will say that my position on this whole issue, it's probably a lot more complicated than a lot of you are used to. I say this because I'm well aware a lot of lollipops are really fucking stupid. I'll tell them that, and to be honest, not really fond of a lot of them. I actually have this fairly lengthy intro written out that meant to sum up my position because I'm generally prone to tripping over my words a lot while dealing with this sort of stage anxiety, so I figure that might just be better off than me spending like 8 minutes trying to gather my thoughts, so I'll just go ahead and read this. It's my general position on Lolicon is that I think people's reasons for it are far more complicated than a lot of people on either side are willing to admit. I don't think that getting turned on by a highly stylized drawing with a number of things that distinct them that can't be replicated in real life would mean that they'd be turned on by the real life equivalent. Like, for example, just think about how often very brutal displays of gore in video games and movies are rarely as traumatizing as seeing an actual murder in real life. And also it confirmed that, and I emphasize, not through any choice of my own, I have been exposed to actual CSEM. Lolly is nowhere near as disgusting as that, and keep in mind, I do think that a lot of lolly art is creepy and gross. And anyway, but at the same time, I'm not gonna say there's literally no connection at all. I'm sure you're aware of a lot of these idiots on Twitter saying, how basically posting images of very young anime girls talking about how they want to fuck them, or doing something like having a Twitter poll with the prime age of anime girls and then only listing underage options. And then whenever they get shit for it, they just say, oh, we're just talking about anime. And it's like, when it comes to these people, it's like, oh, I'm not sure what you're expecting. And I can also tell you from experience, these people, they hate me. These people have been harassing me for almost a year now. These same people have accused me of lying about my own childhood sexual assault and have expressed sympathy for my rapist. They often like to cope by saying they always hold real pedos accountable, when they actually mean they're just going to bitch about trans drag queens and groomers. And so I guess the basic way I can sum up my position is, when it comes to this, I think it depends on someone's reasons why they enjoy this more so than just the fact that they do. I just think that a lot of people cannot think of another reason aside from pedophilia. And I will also say I have extensively talked with my own therapist about this, and what both my own therapist has said and from those whose writing that I've written is that oftentimes when they have patients who are into lolicon, it's more so that they tend to empathize and see themselves in the
You probably already know the state Battlefield 2042 is in right now. I'll be honest.
And that this manifests as some sort of consensual non-consent fantasy where they see themselves as the lolly and not the abuser. And I do think that when you get into when you just blanket assume all of these people who are into it are only into it because they want to fuck kids, that there is a danger to that, because oftentimes sexual attraction can be very convoluted and manifest in a lot of abstract ways. And so I think there's a danger to trying to simplify this, especially in a way that is not often consistent with other fetishes. Like, you generally don't see the same type of hostility towards other fetishes that you see towards lolicon. Like, hold on, I got a Discord notification. So anyway, back to that. It's example to this is I'm also into the guru fetish. I will often make some pretty out there jokes about this on main, and people will not. And generally, people just seem to not really have much reaction to them. Meanwhile, I specifically avoid making any of these types of jokes about lolly because I know it makes people uncomfortable for one, but also I know that a lot of people tend to hold this to a different standard, and I suspect that part of this could be that lolicons are specifically insufferable, and that they tend to act like in exactly the ways that people would imagine a pedophile would act. And also, they're often reactionary right-wingers who are completely immune to self-reflection in any sort of sense. If any of these people were pedophiles, they wouldn't even know it because they refuse to engage in the type of self-reflection that's necessary to know that one's a case. And normally, I'd assume people would want them to get help, but they refuse to. A lot of these people, they're not going to bother engaging in any introspection to begin with. And additionally, I can also confirm from my own experiences that these are some of the most infamously butthurt people you will ever come across. My own positions on this are a lot lighter than a lot of people's, and I still get a ton of harassment from these people just because I try to criticize what I think are not good arguments in favor of lolicon. Okay, so just so you know, this wasn't the original script, but I just sort of used that as a base. So, anyway, it does seem like they're... Yes, so the impression that I got of you when I initially started this... Yeah, I will say, it does seem like you've been genuinely nicer to me in private than... or when engaging with me directly than the vast majority of people I talk to about this subject who are not really able to engage in it with any sort of nuance. Like I get people who call me a pedophile because of my own consensual non-consent fantasies, because I myself enjoy loli specifically because I see myself in these young characters. And let's see, and if it was from a genuine concern about someone taking advantage of kids, they think, oh, this person isn't imagining themselves fucking kids, so that isn't a problem. I may find this fetish fucked up, but oh well. But instead, you have people who just sort of view pedophilia as any weird fetish that... as basically just any weird fetish that they can associate with kids in any way. Like, a lot of these same people are the types who would lump something like age play in, or even something like sexy schoolgirl uniforms. And I do think there is some sort of discussion to be had on those types of topics, and the fetishization of youth is certainly a problem, but again, a lot of people just are not capable of engaging in nuance in any sort of way. So, anyway, I'll leave you to see if you wanted to follow up on any of that.
Okay, so before we start off with this, I would like to say, of course, I empathize with the situations that you faced when you were younger. I myself, I'm not a CSA survivor specifically, but I am an SA survivor myself. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and, lay that out. So, I get the position that you're coming from with trying to cope with that kind of trauma. But, so you said a couple of things there. You mentioned coping mechanisms, so we can talk about that. I guess my main thing is, do you think that this kind of material should be banned?
I do not think it should be banned. I think that even in the case of opposition towards it, that such a ban would be pretty much unenforceable. How exactly would you objectively determine who does and does not look like a child when in real life, both minors and adults have a very large variety of different appearances? You can always find some examples of underage people who look older, or vice versa, adults who look younger than they actually are. I've known several people. As recently as last year, I've been carded at casinos, and yeah. I'm 27.
Yeah, well, I can definitely speak to that. I myself, I actually have to card people at my job. I'm a cashier, so occasionally I have to sell age-restricted items, things such as cigarettes and tobacco to people. And I guess my main thing with that is that, if someone looks young enough to the point where I have to card them, then that's one thing. But I think in the context of media, and specifically, ultimately, whenever we're talking about this, I'm not talking about banning depictions of like wholesome depictions of younger characters in animated media, But when we're talking about mediums that trend towards the more adult side, I think it's pretty easy to be able to point out, okay, in context, this character fits this role in particular and is most likely meant to evoke this kind of sense. So even if it is a situation where it's like a 1,000-year-old dragon, as it was in fucking Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, I think it's pretty easy to see in context what that character is coded as. Like, Kana in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, for example, was coded as a child and the things that happened to her, and, well, that the writers wrote about her were not really good, especially, they were very creepy, especially for a character that was meant to be in the positioning of a child in that show. So, I would say if we were to ban it, I would mostly target things like that. It's pretty easy to see whenever a character is child-coded, because, I mean, I don't know what else to say to that, you know?
I mean, I will say, I have not seen Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid myself, or I may have seen one episode a while ago, and I know there's this stereotype about lolicons in that many of them seem to be attracted to Kana. Even as a lolicon myself, I've never seen the appeal.
Okay.
But anyway, speaking in that regards, it's like I will certainly acknowledge that a lot of portrayals in fiction can certainly be a lot creepier, and that I think there's a right and wrong way to really portray this. And
okay, if I may ask,
and
what do you mean by that? Like a right and wrong way?
Okay. Well, for one, I do share a lot of concerns about how normalized lolicon is in the anime community, especially with how you can have a lot of younger teens who can just walk into like an anime forum or site and suddenly see a bunch of people talking about shit like lollies versus MILFs, which ones are hotter, and generally just how normalized a lot of the shit is, like with how you clearly have some anime that are meant to rely on fan service featuring really young characters that air on Japanese television where kids could see it. I do think that there is a rightful concern when it comes to this type of material. It's just that in general, just in principle, I think there's always a danger to banning a type of media because it's immoral, and because morality itself is often subjective, and it becomes difficult to really think of how you're going to determine what is and isn't immoral, what qualifies as an artistic depiction, and what is clearly just made with ill intent.
Well, even then, when it comes to questions of morality, there are still some things that most people can agree upon. Like, for example, the idea that unjustified murder is wrong is something that most people can agree on. And you can sit around and say that that is something that is largely subjective, but most people would say, okay, even if that is technically subjective, because everything that humans view is subjective, that's just how it is going to be. Even things like math are through a subjective lens, because ultimately humans are creatures that are not objective. The way that we view math, with the way that we use numbers and we name them, and the fact that our brains use a base 10 system instead of like a base 3 or something, that will ultimately be subjective, but we can still make claims about things that stick. We can still make claims about how things should be when it comes to morality. And personally, and I think, not even just personally, but I think societally, we've decided that this kind of material, in most cases, is wrong. The only thing that we have about this material that we are arguing about now is whether or not depictions of it when drawn are wrong or not, when it comes down to it. So
Okay, so Okay, so I think that when it comes to banning something, you need to look at both the material harm and what it's specifically created for the purpose of achieving. And I think that with a lot of people, they assume that the only people who could enjoy something like lolicon are pedophiles.
Well, that's who it's
And
mostly designed and drawn by. I mean, you have to have like a very particular lens to be able to like sit down and draw that and go like, hey, this looks pretty good, I'm gonna post it. I mean, that's just what I think. Because, like, and I'm also speaking of this as someone who does produce art myself, not art like this, of course, but that does produce art myself. It takes a very long time to learn how to draw certain things. I feel like if someone has sat down and learned to draw that particular thing, I think it's a little bit suspect.
Okay, but I do also know, just from a lot of people I've discussed with, it's not always specifically because they want. Okay, but I'm starting to trip over my words. Let me regather my thoughts a bit.
Mm-hmm. Take your time.
Okay, so would your position be the same if there were a number of people who... I think it's safe to assume that the reason behind all of this is that we can't really think of... is that many people can't really think of any other reason why someone would enjoy this if they are not a pedophile themselves.
Well, you said it yourself, like coping mechanisms, which we can get into coping mechanisms later. I'm just saying, like, generally this material is not good. Like, it's drawn pretty explicitly by someone who at least finds this kind of idea attractive, or otherwise they wouldn't, like, dedicate hours, not even hours, but like sometimes days, if not weeks of their life cumulatively to learning to draw this stuff if they didn't find something enticing about it. And I think finding something enticing about the situations depicted in this kind of material is either and I'm gonna go ahead and say this, we can get into coping mechanisms later, but I do just want to go ahead and establish a standard. I think it's finding this material enticing is a representation of a very unhealthy coping mechanism, or B, a representation of a very unhealthy paraphilia that should not be allowed to be satisfied or satiated by this kind of material being open to the public and existing.
Okay, so... I think one thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes when it comes to fetishes, being turned on by the idea of something is not the same time as being turned on by that actual thing happening. Like, I'm going to give an example that one of my mutuals told me. So there was... I mean, I don't know who this specifically happened to. I mean, it was just something that I've heard. So there was someone who was really into scat porn, and eventually they got the chance to star in a scat porno with a very well-known figure within that.
But before you get into the graphic detail, I'm just gonna go ahead and assume, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, they got into it, they tried it, they realized they didn't like it, and then that was that, yeah?
I mean, not only they didn't like it, but they were also basically traumatized by the incident, and which I think it's because there's this disconnect with the idea of it and the reality of it.
But that idea of it, that I'm sure was prompted by the material that person consumed, it did draw them to try it in reality. Is that not correct?
I mean, yeah, that did draw them.
Well, that's kind of my point here. I'll prefer there to be nothing drawing someone, which of course, even in the absence of this, there will still be horrific, disgusting I don't even want to call them people. Personally, I think anyone who does that to anyone isn't a person. Yeah, but I think
I don't think we disagree on that.
yeah. But I would not like there to be any material out there that might try to that not might try to, but might prompt someone to get those kinds of ideas in their head.
Okay. That is one thing that I've been kind of thinking about when it comes to this subject is I notice when the subject of pedophilia comes up, there's often a disconnect between pedophilia as like a specific paraphilia as in a specific attraction and pedophilia as in used to describe people who have sex with kids.
Well, yeah. One is just active abuse. The other is a paraphilia. But at the same time, my personal position on this, I think if someone does have that paraphilia, but they acknowledge that it's a bad thing, and then they choose not to harm children, and they decide to get therapy, then, I think it's unfortunate that they have that paraphilia. They can't control it. I think it's unfortunate, though. However, I do think the line is crossed whenever someone does something that ends up being A, either harming an actual child, or B, consuming material that is child harming, or was produced through child harm, or simulates child harm. Because at that point, that's satiating that, and I don't think that that kind of thing should be satiated. It should be treated. It should be dealt with through a coping mechanism. It shouldn't be normalized, and I think part of normalizing it is allowing this material to exist.
Okay, so what I was going to say to that is that it is say that there are situations where someone would abuse a child like that and maybe not have this specific paraphilia, but they would still logically be considered a pedophile by most people. Like, for example, there are some people who would abuse kids for a sense of power, or some that are sadists instead of pedophiles.
Well, yeah, I still think that's wrong. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I don't think we're going to disagree on that. It's just a case of them being pulled into it may not mean that they literally have this pedophilia, which again, I think it's, yes. Yeah, which I believe that takes us back to what you said about the example of the guy with the scat porn, where it's someone who may not have had the specific fetish for doing this in real life, but got pulled to it because they could not differentiate between their own fantasy and the actual reality that would entail that fantasy. I think that you could see a very similar situation where there are often people who have explicit rape fantasies of either wanting to be raped or the other way around, yet if it were to happen to them, it would likely end up being incredibly harmful to them. And I can speak as someone with these fantasies. It does not mean that I want to be raped in real life.
Well, yes, of course. But my main thing is still, I don't think that that this kind of media should exist. Even if like 99.9% of the people who consume it don't actually carry this out in real life, I still don't think that this kind of material should exist. It's just bad. It's just harmful. The fact of the matter is, this material exists entirely with the idea of these actions that are harmful happening. Even if it is depicted in that media somehow as being like perfectly fine and like not harmful at all, what ultimately happens is harm. Yeah, in every single last one of those situations, if they were to be carried out in real life, someone would be harmed extremely, and we both know that. The fact of the matter is, I personally think that a ban of this kind of material would just be making the world a better place by most likely putting a lot of people in prison who would most likely carry this out. Because again, if you're drawing this, who's to say that you don't have like droves and droves and droves of like the actual material in your closet somewhere or something using as fucking reference. And also, who's to say that you're not yourself going out and doing this? And again, when it comes down to it, if there are people who do use this material to like stop themselves from actually doing it in real life, my suggestion would be for them to seek out like a support group or something, or like therapy. If they can't afford therapy, like, yeah, a support group. Go to someone, talk to someone, be honest about it, and acknowledge that it isn't a good thing. I feel like, which of course I don't think that this applies to you. You consume this for a very particular reason, which I do want to go into later whenever we do talk about coping mechanisms. But I feel like 9 times out of 10, the people making and consuming this material are probably gonna be those who imagine themselves in the position of, I guess you could say, dominance, as fucked up as that is. And I think that that kind of stuff should not be allowed for these sick people to fawn over and watch and like and enjoy. And we can get into coping mechanisms whenever you do want to. It's just, this is a position that I have. I don't think that this stuff should be allowed. And that's what other platforms think as well. I'm pretty sure this stuff is banned off of Reddit. I'm pretty sure the stuff is banned off of like boards on 4chan even. Like, that's how much it is disliked even by these communities. I'm pretty sure Twitter has tried to ban it, even though they do a very poor job at doing it, because it's like almost like once every couple of months I'm arguing with someone who's like, yes, I want to, like, and it's fucked up. But ultimately, I think this material should just be banned. It's bad. It offers little to no benefit, and whatever maybe minor kind of slightly benefit it offers to people using it as a coping mechanism, theoretically could be better sought in other coping mechanisms that are more healthy and more productive, and doesn't require the existence of other material and the existence of other people who use the material to get off on their sick fantasies to exist. So
okay, so there are a few bits of that I would like to respond to. I mean, the first one being the idea that making this illegal would lead to that this would make the world a better place because all the people would be locked up.
Not necessarily, but a couple, I should say.
Well, okay. So just as a hypothetical, if you, like, let's say, if it was like say 5% of the people who what percent of the people who consume lolly would need to actually do this in real life for it to be justified, or or specifically what ratio would it need to be for it to not be justified, in your opinion?
I think any amount of people consuming this content that then later use it as an inspiration to harm actual children is enough.
Okay, so basically, if anyone gets the idea to use this to harm children, then that means that anyone else that means the whole thing should be banned. But the problem I have with that is that works of art and media have inspired deranged people to carry out atrocious acts for all of human history. We've had someone wanted to, I don't remember the guy was, but they tried to kill John Lennon because of Catcher in the Rye.
They did kill John Lennon.
They did?
Yeah. That was actually the example that popped into my mind. My only response to that would be nothing in Catcher in the Rye encourages anyone to kill anyone else. Whereas this material, in its existence, does inherently paint a picture, and by painting that picture, kind of sort of lightly encourage people to actually carry out these acts. It may not explicitly say it, but it often has depictions of that, and it has normalizations of it, which can encourage someone to carry something out.
I mean, personally, I wouldn't consider a just straightforward depiction to be the same thing as would be to be the same thing as encouraging. I would just think of it as not condoning, which I think there is a difference between the two. And I mean, I think it would be a different story if, say, you had lolly hentai that included instructions for pedophiles on how to groom children, or if it started providing that one statistic that pedophiles love to use, where they say that most adult men are attracted to underage women, because somehow apparently that's supposed to be an argument in favor of pedophilia instead of an argument against how rape culture often coincides with toxic masculinity. I don't know, a lot of these people are just fucked up. But again, and additionally, there's often a lot of immoral media doesn't necessarily outright say you should do something, but doesn't condone it either. Like with video games, if you have shit like Hatred or Postal, you'll have people who bring these things up all the time in order to discredit the medium as a whole and say that all of these should be banned. And I guess the difference is that most lolicon doesn't really have any sort of artistic integrity, but I mean, I guess it's just, I don't think that being immoral in its nature is an argument in favor of legally regulating something. And what else was it?
Okay, well, I think sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
And I will say, I think that in regards, and in general, I'm weary of any arguments against citing a work of fiction, even a bad one, as the cause of society's ills rather than a reflection of it. Like, for example, you recently had Tim Pool come out in favor of lolicon, and this is just a few days after he spoke in defense of Andrew Tate getting caught for engaging in sex trafficking. When he speaks against lolicon and I don't think it's him genuinely wanting to make the world a better place, or him wanting to fight child exploitation. He's just looking for a convenient scapegoat that he could use to blame on society's ills, instead of acknowledging that are serious systemic issues that need to be addressed. And this is something that conservatives have been doing for several decades. Like Milo Yiannopoulos, for example, blamed Elliot Rodgers' mass shooting on violent video games, and of course this was before gamers started siding with him during Gamergate, which just shows you how a lot of these types view media. I believe that the problem is the community itself rather than the media itself.
Okay, I do have to say, video games and this kind of medium are completely different because of what they simulate. Whenever you're playing a video game, you're playing something very detached from real life. I've actually read some articles on this. So like one of my things is I'm really into first person shooters. And one day when I was playing a first person shooter, I was like, would like a veteran who has PTSD have their PTSD triggered by playing like a first person shooter? And I actually read up on it. And some are, but not a lot necessarily are, because there is that detachment. However, that does not mean that all pieces of media don't have the capability of causing actual harm into the real world. So an example that I can use is the movie Jaws. Have you heard of the movie Jaws? Like, yes or no?
Yes, I haven't. I think I have an idea of what argument you're making here.
Yeah. So, like, the movie Jaws led to people, A, becoming hysterically terrified of sharks, which they shouldn't be. Sharks are mostly docile creatures whenever you come upon them. There's only like really one kind of shark that is outwardly aggressive, but even then more people get killed by ants than sharks a year, and people aren't that outwardly aggressive to ants. And moreover, it led to the deaths of thousands of sharks as people went out and tried to hunt them in order to kill them because they saw them as a threat. Yeah? Even though some pieces of media may not have an outward effect, other pieces of media do. So if you are going to make the argument that this stuff isn't harmful, which I would disagree with, then I suggest that you would bring me some data or something proving that it isn't harmful. Because 9 times out of 10, material that depicts a harm of a child in this sort of form was made with the intention of satiating the desires of people who actually want to harm children. That's why this thing was made. It's made to satiate their desires, and I think satiating those people's desires is a bad thing that leads to harm. They should be seeking help, not solace.
Okay, so problem I have with that argument, particularly with, is that in cases of media directly affecting reality in a negative ways, the common thread that I've noticed with these is that usually it's in regards to either spreading misinformation or a harmful ideology. Like, with Jaws, it's a case of misinformation, and in cases of a harmful ideology, you have, quite literally, you have Nazi propaganda films or the racist cartoons of
I would argue that this does spread misinformation. Well, not even necessarily misinformation, but it does spread the harmful ideology that it is fine to do this to children.
I mean, I'm not sure if I'd really agree with that. I think that even child predators or the people that have thoughts of doing this think it's wrong to do so to children. They just choose to ignore it. Or in some cases, it's that they literally can't help it due to some serious mental illness.
Well, yeah, and I would prefer that those people get treatment than allow their desires to be satiated by this kind of material and allow that kind of action to be normalized by consuming this kind of material. Yeah.
Okay, but are you aware that oftentimes, I mean, well, this isn't for predators. This isn't for predators or people with these desires, but I've genuinely heard a number of cases, at least from people I know, where it was their own therapists that actually suggested something like Lolly and Shoda to help cope with stress and trauma surrounding either childhood abuse or child sexual assault.
Okay, question. Since we're getting into coping mechanisms, I just want to ask you a quick little question. Do you think if someone had, like, an abusive alcoholic parent, do you think it would be a healthy coping mechanism for them to watch and constantly inundate themselves with media that contained abusive alcoholic parents? Do you think that would be a healthy thing for them to do?
I'm not sure I really see the connection there. I just sort of see it.
Let's say this. Someone, as a child, was abused by a horrifically horrible alcoholic parent. Do you think it would be healthy for them to willingly subject themselves to that kind of material in order as like a form of coping mechanism, or do you think that there might be better strategies that they can use to cope with the trauma that they had in the past? Basically, do you think that they should use like very fucked up exposure therapy on themselves by making themselves surround themselves with depictions of that horrific event? Like, do you think that's healthy?
I'm not sure I know of any specific examples of people actually doing this.
Well, yeah. That's why I'm not asking examples. I'm just asking, what would your take on that be? Like, would you think that that would be a healthy thing for them to do?
I mean, I don't think I really see it as healthy or unhealthy one way or the other, because, I mean, there's a lot of people who are victims of sexual assault who then fixate on the subject as a whole. They may end up gravitating towards media on these types of topics. It's generally what happens.
Okay, but my question isn't whether or not it happens. My question is whether or not that is healthy for them. And do you think that there might be better coping mechanisms for it? Because I'm not going to deny it is a coping mechanism, but I'm not going to necessarily say that it's a healthy one.
Okay,
especially when there are thousands of coping mechanisms out there.
Okay, but anyway, here's what I think. If it works and they're healthier, then yes. If sometimes some coping mechanisms work well for some people and don't work well for others.
Okay, so to expand upon this, do you think it would be, say, okay, question, what are you doing in the background there?
Oh, that was an empty soda can.
Okay, just saying, I can kind of hear that. But yeah, no. My main question to that would be, okay, if that is a coping mechanism, don't you think it's a little fucked up for other people to get off on that coping mechanism by fantasizing about doing that to people?
I mean, I'll just say, speaking as a survivor myself, I mean, if they're getting off on this kind of material instead of actually doing this to children in real life, then I'm fine with them doing whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm more concerned about whether or not more people have to go through what I did than the morality of it all.
Okay. So, again, healthy coping mechanisms. We can go down the list. I don't necessarily think that this form of exposure therapy is healthy, yeah? And I would like to reiterate myself, I'm coming to you as someone who has also survived sexual abuse myself, okay? I don't think this is necessarily the most healthy, if I'm being honest with you.
Well, you're welcome to believe whatever you want.
Yes, and I'm also welcome to say that I don't think that this kind of material should exist. Like flat out, full stop. Even as a coping mechanism, there are various coping mechanisms that are 10 times more healthy than this and result in 10 times less harm when it comes to the discussions of these topics. You said it yourself earlier, a vast majority of the people that you interact with on the internet who deal with this kind of nonsense are the exact kind of people that would like to perpetuate this kind of abuse, are the same exact kind of people who do fantasize about doing this horrific kind of shit. I think the existence of this material is not only an unhealthy coping mechanism, because there are other things that are much better at handling this outside of that. I don't only think that this is an unhealthy coping mechanism, I also think that it is one that could potentially promote more abuse in the future. I don't think it's good. Just as a good depiction, like just as a sympathetic depiction of like an alcoholic abuser is not a good thing. I don't think a depiction of this kind of material is a good thing either. It doesn't help. It may help some people, but the harm outweighs how much it helps people, and that isn't good. Yeah? There are some things in real life that do help a lot of people, but would harm a lot of others, and I don't think that that kind of material should exist. Even if it isn't this, yeah? I think if there's like one thing that they pumped into the water that helped like 25% of the population but gave cancer to the other 75%, I would still think that that thing should be banned. Even if it helps some people, that doesn't make it right.
Okay, it's starting to come across more like you specifically... Okay, I'm getting the impression at this point that you don't even care if it helps others.
No,
It's more so-
I'm glad that it helps other people, but I think the helping, the benefit is significantly outweighed by the harm.
I mean, okay, I'm honestly not sure how I'm supposed to respond to this one. I fully understand your concerns. And honestly, I'm glad that you're willing to share this with me. But I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond. Am I supposed to take what you say to me, or the mental health professional who says otherwise?
I mean,
Or
I do
the
think mental
previous-
health professionals can be wrong, also. Yeah. Keep in mind, 50 years ago, they thought gay people were a disease. I'm just saying, sometimes people get things fucked up.
Well, keep in mind, people will also give that same reply if, say, a therapist supports a trans person transitioning. And it's not just the therapist I'm currently seeing, it's the one I saw before that.
Okay, but I would also like to
church.
say to that, I don't think that there is any comparison between depictions of pedophilia in media and trans people. I think those are two completely different topics.
Okay, I think the overall groups themselves aren't comparable. I think that specifically, I've said before, I think the lolicon community has a lot worse people, but at the same time, I believe that some people are quick to resort to some of the same arguments in these cases, and I don't think that these arguments become more valid just because it's against a worse group. I'd be willing to go into what some of these arguments in specific are if you were not really getting it.
Yeah, sure, you can go ahead.
Okay, specifically, it's the argument of disgust and immorality in general. I don't think that disgust on its own is an acceptable argument in favor of something being banned. I think that you need
that
to
is
have
exactly
evidence.
why I have not argued on the basis of disgust. I've argued on the basis of it causing harm. So that you don't have to, potentially waste breath on talking about disgust. Yeah,
Okay,
I will say
so
I am disgusted by this kind of material, but I'm not arguing based on disgust. I'm arguing based on material harm that it can cause to people.
Okay, do we have any specific evidence that this material directly causes this harm?
Yes, actually, we've actually talked about it in DMs. Some people use this kind of material to groom people.
Okay,
To groom young children into committing these acts. As such, they were probably motivated by this kind of material in order to commit these acts, and hence why they're using it to groom people, so that they can do that.
Are you a Second Amendment supporter by any chance?
I am a Second Amendment supporter, indeed.
Well, you do know guns are used to shoot and kill people, right?
Yes, and I think that that's a bad thing, which is also why I believe in gun control. But I also think that shooting and killing people can be beneficial depending on who the people are. But generally, I think that sexual abuse material is not a good thing. Yeah. Actually, as a matter of fact, I'm willing to make this position just to make it more clear. I think that there is far more of a material benefit to people owning guns than there is a material benefit to people owning this kind of material. Yeah, like for example, I think that more queer people should own guns, especially with the state of this nation. I think people should be able to engage in that kind of self-defense. However, I don't believe that people should be able to engage in consuming this material.
Okay, well, the problem I have with that is lolicon is not intended for people to use to groom children. It's intended for adults to fap to in the privacy of their own home.
And I think that's a bad thing. I don't think that people should be doing that to depictions of this kind of act. I think that's bad. Ah, shit, sorry about that, I dropped something. I think that's bad.
So you think it's bad even if these people are not doing any harm to others, and if...
I
mean,
think by
it's-
consuming and promoting this material, they are doing an inherent harm. It's actually, you know what? I'm willing to bring this out. How would you feel? Hold up, let me put something on screen. I'm not trying to get fucking bossed. I'm not trying to get bossed. Hypothetical. Do not take this out of context. Alright. Okay, so how about this? Hypothetically, how would you feel if someone were to take actual material of this kind of action happening? Actual honest to God material in real life, honest dyed in the wool material of this happening, and release it for people to be able to, say, use as a coping mechanism. And no other material can be produced. Yeah? The same acts would still be illegal, but this would just be open to other people to use. How would you feel about that? Do you think that that would be a good thing for people to just be consuming in the privacy of their own homes? Do you think that would be healthy or beneficial?
It would depend. Would it succeed at making sure less people get sexually assaulted? As I've said, I'm more concerned about the effects it's having. I mean, I personally would be very uncomfortable by the idea, but if it's willing to, but if it genuinely means less people are molested and less people are harmed, I'd be willing to put aside that discomfort.
Okay.
I mean, though somehow I don't think this would have that effect. I'm speaking purely in a hypothetical scenario where it would, which...
Okay. So, you're ambivalent to it, basically.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm completely ambivalent. It's just that I think it's...
Okay.
I mean, I guess if the way I could try and sum up my issue with what you're saying here is, a lot of it seems to be echoed in tough on crime, on conservative tough on crime positions, where naturally, yes, we all want people who engage in horrific crimes to pay for their action, but it becomes a question of, is it more important for these people or treatment options or the possibility for reform to be offered to these people than simple punishment? So it's like...
To be honest with you, I am for rehabilitative justice. I do not think allowing people to consume this kind of material is rehabilitative. I think rehabilitative justice would be going to therapy. I think rehabilitative justice would be getting support for it. You know? Finding out actual healthy coping mechanisms, not just consuming the same material, but to a lesser degree.
Okay, what it sounds like you're saying is this whole time you are saying that there is proof that this harms people. And
it's the way it's produced inherently implies some level of... Okay, are we talking about the actual stuff now, or are we talking about like the drawing stuff?
Drawings.
Okay, yes.
Like actual CSCM, I think we can agree that's inherently abusive.
Yeah. So where's the disconnect that you're seeing here? Is it because it's not real depictions of it? Because you do know that like depictions of things in media can like draw people to change their positions on things, right?
I assume that you're talking about if someone is specifically drawing lolly art by tracing an actual child, If so, that practice is heavily despised even among the lolicon community.
Okay, but that would most likely inherently have to go into, like, every form of drawing this kind of art. Like, we do... Like, do you draw at all?
I do not.
Okay, I'm gonna say this to you as someone who does do art. Reference and art go hand in hand. You have to be able to reference some kind of material. Not always, yeah. When you get really skilled, that's one thing. But leading up to your skill, to train, 9 times out of 10, a lot of artists are going to be looking at references or things, are going to be reading books, studying anatomy, doing things like that. And the way that they usually do that is by looking at in real life pictures, studying them, and then trying to incorporate that into drawing. Yeah? So I would raise this to you. And you could ask, like, any artist, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yeah, I use, like, some form of reference. And if I don't, I've used reference in the past. That's what most artists are going to say to you. So, I am going to ask you, with this knowledge being known, is it not suspect that people are still drawing this? Because they would have to have learned that from somewhere. And even if they did learn it entirely from drawings themselves, the people who drew that most likely had to learn it from somewhere. At some point, someone actually got harmed. So what level of detraction are you going to have from that until you are willing to say that that is harmful or that is not harmful? Because somewhere down the line, someone did have to get harmed for that to happen.
I think conversations like this, they sort of end up going into that subject that Vash had regarding, comparisons between, comparisons in products made through the physical exploitation of kids, such as child slavery and actual CSEM.
Well, yeah, and his argument in that was that both are bad.
Well, I do agree. Both are bad.
Okay, so do you think that this is bad as well? Because at some point, some child, had to be harmed in order for this reference to exist.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then would you say that this material is also a form of CSEM?
If it was specifically created through the process of harming a child, then yes.
Well, yeah, but again, somewhere down the line, even if you're like 10 artists removed, yeah, even if like every artist leading up to this learned how to draw this through other artists' drawing, at some point down the line, a reference had to be learned for it to inspire one artist, and then that artist to inspire another artist, and etc., 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 somewhere down the line. Yeah, someone had to be harmed. So with that knowledge, would you not say that this is just wrong flat out? Or at least harmful flat out, if you don't want me to use terms like wrong. Because some harm had to happen. Inevitably, some harm had to happen.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that. You yourself admitted that when it's... I think that there's a pretty significant difference between literally using reference art that is in it not... Okay, so... I think the first person who abused a child during the creation of that art, the first art that was created through that abuse, that's CSEN. And that's, again, assuming that they base this creation off of an actual child and not say that they just used a doll or something as a reference model. I think that otherwise, if it's just that I don't think there's like some sort of transitive property of CSEM that turns all of the other ones into a form of CSEM.
Okay, but were they not all inspired somewhere down the line by that one starting incident?
I mean, I guess it's, but that's kind of, but being inspired by something that was, but that seemed. Yeah, but saying that something was inspired by something that was inspired by something that was inspired by something that was inspired by something, and so on, that something that is a form that can be called a form of CSEM is not the same as it itself being CSEM.
Okay. So you don't think that it's necessarily a relationship between this? So you don't think that even if something was initially inspired by CSEM, and like even 10 steps down the line, it was still inspired by depictions and iterations upon that CSEM, you don't think that it still carries that same harm? Or not necessarily same harm, but that harm. That general kind of category of harm.
I mean, what I can say is if I knew for sure that something was directly inspired by something that is CSEM, I would not be comfortable. I would not feel comfortable engaging with it. It's just that this sense of abstraction, this sort of yes, and again, I don't know how common it is for this to happen. Like, I don't know if lolly artists are literally just drawing. I mean, it's like, it's like, if I wouldn't know if using something as a reference means that they are themselves objectifying this child. Like, I'm sure there are plenty of Renaissance paintings of young children that clearly use them as a reference, yet they're still proudly displayed in museums.
Well, yeah, but I think that can also be like very fucked up. Yeah.
Well, I am okay. I mean, yeah, we agree that it's fucked up, but that doesn't mean that people who are casually looking at this are themselves complicit in the abuse of those same children by virtue of simply consuming this form of media.
Well, no, but if it's abuse material, then it's abuse material, and I would say that they would be complicit in that, yeah. Again, it depends on the material, but we're talking about abuse material specifically here. Yeah. They'll still be complicit in that. Because that had to be produced somehow.
So you are saying that people who view a Renaissance painting of young children at a museum are complicit in the abuse of these children that were likely long dead by the time these people were even born.
I would say that they would be complicit in the perpetuation of that abuse into the modern day, yeah. And again, it depends on what that Renaissance painting depicts. If it's just some child in like some fucking apple orchard or something, then it's one thing. But, hold up. Listen, if it's like a Renaissance picture of a child in like an apple orchard just like fucking eating a fucking apple or some shit, then that's one thing. But if it is a Renaissance portrait of a child getting abused, then yeah, I would say A, the museum still having that up can be a little bit odd, and B, viewing it can also be a little bit odd. But at the same time, people don't look at Renaissance paintings to get off. People do consume lolicon to get off, though. And that's where the bad thing is. They're getting off on the abuse of children.
Okay, a lot of this seems to come around. Okay, I think where our difference comes from is I'm more concerned about objective harm, where, as you said, where it seems more so like you're making all of these abstractions to claim that.
Because this is a wide topic. harm is a wide topic, and this isn't a topic that has been studied much. Most, like there is no fucking, as far as I can tell, there is no study on, like, the definitive harm that this can cause. So I'm just going off of what other things do cause harm. And I would say, actual CSEM does cause harm. I think we can both agree on that. Actual CSEM does cause harm. Can we both agree on that?
Yes, I don't think we ever disagree with that.
And then with that agreement, I just wanted to, like, verbalize. Yeah, I knew that we most likely agreed on that, yeah. But, with that being said, actual CSEM does depict harm, and I would think that, the drawn version of that does depict harm as well. It's in the same way that a Nazi propaganda film would depict harm, in the same way that a Nazi propaganda poster would depict harm. I don't think putting it in the medium of drawing suddenly makes it non-harmful. And yes, I did just break Godwin's law.
I mean, I wasn't actually going to accuse you of anything for that, but I mean, I must admit, I find a lot of these arguments confusing.
Oh, and I should say, I accidentally said, like, depict harm. I meant cause harm. I accidentally said depict.
Okay. Oh, that, I think, makes more sense. It's like, I would like to go back to that example you said earlier with, the whole thing about people using lolly to groom children. I mean, what I was saying before is, I don't think that people are specifically making this for the purpose of, having pedophiles use it to groom children. I don't think that's the intention behind its creation. I believe that, and the reason I brought up the gun example was because I don't think, well, I feel like that it's even more baffling that one would support, that guns, which are specifically created for the purpose of killing people, this is not treated the same way.
Okay,
I mean, I guess,
but I can explain why. Yeah.
I mean,
some
think
people.
It's because of what you.
I can actually explain that. Yeah, some people killing them is not a bad thing. Yeah, I think if someone is assailing upon you, you have every right to kill them. Yeah, to defend yourself. I do also believe that in no circumstance is child abuse okay. That's simple. These are two completely different topics. That actually goes into my opinion on rehabilitative justice. I think it is much easier to rehabilitate someone who killed someone than it would be to rehabilitate someone who abused a child. Because one thing, you can justify it in some circumstances. You can justify killing someone who, like, killed your family. You can justify killing someone who was posing an active threat to you. You cannot justify harming a child. There's no circumstance, no realistic circumstance where you could justify that.
I don't recall saying that there was, but
I know, I just wanted to, like, make that, I just wanted to specify that before you compare this to killing. Because these are two completely different things.
Well, I think I was more so referring to the issue of how having more guns means that it's easier for people who want to use them for malicious purposes can use them for malicious purposes. Like having more guns around the house means, like, a mass shooter could easily get a hold of them, much more so than with stricter gun control. And I believe that, in the process of using something up that is clearly intended for something else for the purpose, or instead for malicious purposes that it was not intended for, I do not believe that this then reflects on everyone who continues to own these or create these. It's like personally, I think that, yeah, it's like just how I don't think that anyone who owns a gun is in favor of mass shooters having guns and going on shooting sprees with them. I don't think that anyone who consumes lolicon is in favor of people using it to groom children. And I would also like to add, pedophiles can often be incredibly resourceful when it comes to finding ways to groom children. These people have been around for ages and have found ways to groom children. I feel like focusing specifically on something that this is not intended for. That's something that Lolly is not intended for use for as a way that it objectively has harm and thus should therefore be completely banned, while also supporting something that could have the same thing applied to it, like with guns, which again, not everyone who owns a gun intends to harm innocents with this. It's rather that, but owning them still increases the amount of harm done. And to be honest, I do think that large-scale distribution of guns does result in more innocent people getting shot than the distribution of lolly results in children groomed. Because I believe that most of these pedophiles that would use it to groom children could find some other way to do so.
Yes, and I would prefer them have less ways to do it. Both of these things can exist at the same time. You can still... Actually, yeah, I can use it. I can actually use this, the gun argument. Do you know what kind of weapon the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was shot by to be killed? He was shot by a makeshift gun. He was shot by a makeshift gun. Yeah, the person who wanted to assassinate him still found a way. But you know what? Shinzo Abe is one of 20 gun deaths that will happen in the past year in the nation of Japan. 1 of 20. And personally, I do support gun rights. But you can't argue results there, if I'm being honest with you. 1 of 20 gun deaths. It's in the same way. Will people be resourceful? Yes. Will people always find a way? Yes. But giving them less tools is good. Personally, if you want to argue gun control, we can do that in a different debate. But if I am going to use your position on you, one thing is clearly a benefit here, and it would be banning this material. I want to give these people less tools, not leave it open to more.
I mean, I will say, personally, I do think that if you could specifically keep this out of the material out of the hands of people who intend to use it for harm, I do think that this is well, I think we both agree to that people who would use it to harm others should not have this type of material.
Okay, so then in that case, should we make it, say, restricted? Maybe to the point where it doesn't exist? So that people can't use it to harm other people? Because you did say that we both agree sort of on that it would be better if this
we agreed that people who would use it for the purpose of spreading harm would not be caused by that. So
so they shouldn't have it. Yeah, we both agree on that, which is why I think that they should ban it. I think it should be banned.
I'm well aware that's your position.
Yeah. My question is, like, why is that not yours?
We both agree with certain people not being allowed to have it.
Well, yeah, but how do you regulate that? Like, this is one of those things that, like, you can regulate guns. It's kind of hard to regulate art on the internet. Like what are you gonna do? Like, do, like, a prescription for it?
Well, I was more so thinking of something along the lines of banning sex offenders from looking up this type of material online.
That is gonna be so difficult to be fucking enforced, especially in the age
Well,
of VPNs.
Well, it would be so difficult to. Well, it would be difficult to outright ban this stuff as well. And
Well, yeah,
also,
but it could still be done. Other websites have
well,
done it. Websites like Reddit have done it. Websites like YouTube have done it. It may be difficult to do it, but it can be done.
I mean, a platform banning it is quite a bit different from making something illegal and then cracking down and arresting the people who possess or distribute it.
You do
And
know
also,
you do know that, like, these platforms can just work alongside the government. They've done it before for very bad reasons. I would prefer them to do it for a good reason, and I think this is a good reason.
would you believe that people who use it as a coping mechanism deserve to go to prison for it?
No, I don't think they deserve to go to prison. I think they deserve better coping mechanisms now. More fruitful coping mechanisms.
I mean, so then I believe that goes into the issue of how this would even be executed. Would this retroactively be applied to? I mean, would this retroactively be applied to anyone who's ever?
I think retroactively no, but going forward, yeah.
I mean, because the thing is, if this stuff is made illegal, then it will mean people like me who were just trying to find a coping mechanism for our own trauma will go to jail for it.
Well, yeah, I think that's unfortunate, which is why I don't think it should be a retroactive ban. But, like, going forward, yeah. And also, I do think that, like, again, there are better coping mechanisms that are out there. And again, I'm saying this as someone who is as a survivor myself.
I'm well aware.
There are better coping mechanisms out there.
So I'm thinking things over. I'm not sure if this conversation's really going to go anywhere else. I'm not really sure.
Okay, if you don't think this conversation is fruitful, you are more than welcome to leave. And if you want to say a final statement, you can, but I would like to say my final statement first. Okay? This material, no matter what happens, no matter what occurs, flat out isn't good. On the topic of coping mechanisms, there are millions of coping mechanisms out there. There are good coping mechanisms, there are bad coping mechanisms. For example, it's a good coping mechanism to go to therapy, go to a support group, etc. It is a bad coping mechanism to get involved in hard drugs. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy coping mechanism. I don't think people should go to prison for that, but it's not a healthy coping mechanism. Yeah? And I think that this topic and this type of content isn't healthy because it is an active depiction of trauma, and the way that it is depicted and the way that it is produced, at some point down the line, someone was most likely harmed in order for it to occur, in order for this material to be produced, even if it's drawn, and I think that is a bad thing. Actually, no, I'm not even going to say I think it's a bad thing. It is a bad thing. Okay? Now, on the topic of people who consume this junk in order to get off on it. They are horrible people. I think we would both agree that people who consume this kind of junk to get off on it are pedophiles. If you're getting off on this kind of depiction in order to satisfy your desires to harm a child, that would make you a pedophile. I think we can both agree on that. And as such, this kind of media is made typically by pedos for pedos. There are outcroppings, like you described were people using as a coping mechanism, but that's why I said it's not a good coping mechanism. Because inherently to it, someone had to be harmed for it to be produced. Now, off of that, I think it should be banned. Do I think that you're a bad person? Going off of this, do I think that you're a bad person? No. You've been 100% honest with me, and I don't believe that you used this material in order to get off on, like, some fucked up fantasy of harming a child. I don't think you do that. Which I think is, a good thing. And I hope that maybe there might be some different coping mechanisms out there for you to use. Because this is genuinely not a healthy one. And with that being said, I care about, people. And I wish all the best for you. Now, if you want to say your final closing statement, feel free to, and then we can go ahead and get off this and end it.
Okay, I will say mine, and I would like to thank you as well. You've genuinely treated me with a lot more kindness and respect than a lot of people on this topic do, and I do appreciate that. And I do get that while I may disagree with some things, it does come across like these are rooted in genuine concerns and a desire to make the world a better place, and I also have a lot of respect for that. My issue comes from the idea that if I had to give an issue, it's just that with a lot of my research on this subject and with what the therapists that not only I've seen personally, but whose writing I've said, and whom I've also talked to outside of my own group circles, is that it goes against what you were saying. And that I believe, and I think if there was some sort of definitive proof that most people who engage with this type of content who get off to it, if there was some type of hard evidence that it's mostly people who go on to harm others, and that this content is directly responsible, that it is specifically made for this purpose, then I would reconsider these things. But as far as I know, that's not the case. Now, if need be, I could provide you some of the data that I found specifically to discuss this sort of content. I do think that also my lack of speaking abilities may have bit me in the ass here. We're clearly discussing about a lot of abstract concepts when it comes to this, and I do think that if I specifically had more time, that a lot of questions did kind of catch me off guard, and if I had some more time to discuss them, then maybe maybe I could have formulated my thoughts a little bit better. But either way, thank you for having me on, and I do appreciate it, and I hope things work out for you.
All right, thank you. You have a good night. All the best to you.
Okay.
And again, like you said, I think you said like you had read up on some things and like had seen data. Is that what you said in your closing?
Yeah.
Okay, if you have, please feel free to send that to me.
Okay.
Actually, not even please feel free. Do send that to me, actually. I would like to see it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Alright, you have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Bye. Okay. So, that was that. I feel like I could have done better there. Oh man. That was I was angry, but repressing my anger because I get where she was coming from. And I said it at the end, I wasn't lying. I don't think that she's doing this maliciously. I don't think... I read through her tweet. She's not one of those fucking people that's, like, weird and fucking skeevy about this. I mean, inherently, too, arguing this, there is, like, some form of weirdness to it, but I don't think she's one of those people that is, like, about it. I do think she was being entirely good faith there in the way that she was arguing. And that was why I was, like, really suppressing my anger, because, like, I didn't want to blow up on this person. But at the same time, I don't really think my positions on this topic can be changed. This shit is just harmful. Flat out. Full stop. And at some point, as someone who does art, you have to reference shit. You have to reference shit. And at some point down the line, it is heavily likely that some child got harmed. And that shit is not okay. Stream isn't over. Well, good night, Octosplats, but yeah, stream isn't over, y'all. But inherently, this shit is bad. And I'm not gonna capitulate on that. I don't think I ever will capitulate on that unless I got, like, some really good fucking data. And even then, I don't think my argument would change from a ban perspective. Because I still think that there are better coping mechanisms out there. I said it at the beginning of the debate, but I myself am a SA survivor. And I would never personally, and this is a personal argument, this is an anecdote, which is why I didn't use it in the argument. I just stated it in there because, like, I wouldn't have been shocked, not saying that she's a bad person, but I wouldn't have been shocked if, like, something like, oh, well, you never experienced something like this, so, like, you don't understand. That's why I mentioned it in there, and I didn't really go further than that. But as someone who's, like, survived shit myself, my experience wasn't as harrowing as, like, CSA. I can maybe go into it later. I really don't want to, though. But I would never personally consume any material related to that. It would fuck me up. And that argument of it being a coping mechanism, I get that, but there are much better things out there, and we all know that, like, probably a vast majority of people who A, produce this content, and A, consume this content, do it because they want to harm children. Flat out. But with that being said, the stream is not over yet. I'm most likely going to hop in debate queue because I think someone else is in there. And if you like this video, I love you all. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Hit the bell icon. You can join my Discord in the description if you ever want to debate me on anything. And you can also follow me on Twitter. I just hit 900 followers. Hopefully I get 1,000 before my birthday, which is in a couple of weeks. And I love you all. And I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.